Thank you all for coming today. My name is Jonah Dross, and I am the current Senior President of the Federalist Society here at the University of Miami.
Hi, I'm Emily Nadell. I'm the Junior President of the Federalist Society of Miami.
No unitary executive here, I see.
So good evening and welcome to our conversation about cancel culture with Professor Blackman and Professor Jones. Before we tell you more about our speakers, as this is our first major speaker event of the semester, we want to tell you a little bit more and remind you about the missions and goals of the Federalist Society.
In its mission and purpose, the Federalist Society is unique by providing a forum for legal experts of opposing views to interact with members of the legal profession, the judiciary, law students, academics, and the architects of public policy. The Society has redefined the terms of legal debate. Our expansion in membership, chapters, and program activity has been matched by the rapid growth of the Society's reputation and the quality and influence of our events. We have fostered a greater appreciation for the role of separation of powers, federalism, limited constitutional government, and the role of law in protecting individual freedom and traditional values. Overall, the Society's efforts are improving our present and future leaders' understanding of principles underlying American law.
The Federalist Society provides opportunities for effective participation in the public policy process. The Society's ongoing programs encourage our members to involve themselves more actively in local, statewide, and national affairs, and to contribute more productively to their communities. Now let's talk about our honored guest that we're going to be hearing from today.
Josh Blackman is a national thought leader on constitutional law and the United States Supreme Court. Josh's work was quoted during 2 presidential impeachment trials. He has testified before Congress and advises federal and state lawmakers. Josh regularly appears on TV, including NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, and the BBC. Josh is also a frequent guest on NPR and other syndicated radio programs. He has published commentaries in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and leading national publications. Since 2012, Josh has served as a professor at the South Texas College of Law, Houston. He holds the Centennial Chair of Constitutional Law. Josh is the senior editor of the Heritage Guide to the Constitution, 3rd edition. Josh has written more than 7 dozen law review articles that have been cited more than 1,000 times. Josh was selected the Jurist of the Year by the Texas Journal of Law and Public Policy, received the inaugural Mies III Originalism Award for the Heritage Foundation, and was awarded the inaugural Joseph Story Award. Josh was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy. Josh is the president of the Harlan Institute and founded Fantasy Supreme Court of the U.S., the Internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league. He blogs at the Bull Conspiracy and tweets at Josh M. Blackman. Thank you for traveling to speak with us today, Professor Blackman.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Donald Jones, Professor of Law, is a Baltimore native and a graduate of the New York University School of Law. He teaches constitutional law, criminal procedure, and criminal law at the law school. Professor Jones is a prominent author, legal theorist, and commentator who has earned an international reputation by thinking critically about important issues concerning the civil and political rights of all Americans. Professor Jones is the author of 3 books: Race, Sex, and Suspicion, The Myth of the Black Male, Fear of a Hip-Hop Planet, America's New Dilemma, and Dangerous Spaces, Beyond the Racial Profile. Professor Jones's work weaves together law, history, and human narratives to explore the gulf between formal equality and the social disadvantage people of color still experience in their lives. In addition to his now 3 books, Professor Jones has written numerous articles in leading legal journals. His most famous works include Darkness Made Visible, Law, Metaphor, and the Racial Self in the Georgetown Law Journal, No Time for Trumpets, Title VII, Equality, and the Fin de Siècle in the University of Michigan Law Journal. His essays also appear in books including Chapter 13 of Delgado and Stefanchich, Critical White Studies, Looking Behind the Mirror, and in Levitt et al., Hurricane Katrina, America's Unnatural Disaster. More recently, Professor Jones published Plessy's Ghost, Grutter, Seattle, and the Quiet Reversal of Brown, A Bronx Tale, Disposable People, the Legacy of Slavery, and the Social Death of Khalif Browder. In 1997, Professor Jones was awarded the James Thomas Prize by Yale University, recognizing him as one of the leading scholars in the country for the year. In 2007, he was voted the most outstanding member of the National Bar Association for that year. Professor Jones has lectured nationally for many years. Representative presentations include lectures in connection with critical theory at both Yale and Harvard, keynote addresses before the NAACP annual convention, presentations at book fairs, Race, Sex, and Suspicion, The Myth of the Black Male at the Miami Book Fair in 2005, Fear of a Hip-Hop Planet, America's New Dilemma at the Miami Book Fair in 2013, Race and Psychology at the Sigmund Freud University in Vienna and the University of Prague, Teaching Lawyers about the Role of Narrative Litigation at ACLU's Litigation Conference in September 2017. As a teacher, Professor Jones has developed several innovative courses, including teaching a course about the intersection of law and criminal justice policy called The Wire, using television series as a springboard to legal and social analysis. Professor Jones also created and directs an externship to allow students to get experience working on civil rights litigation addressing critical, legal, and social issues. As a public intellectual, Professor Jones has written numerous editorials for the Miami Herald, the Huffington Post, and the South Florida Times. He has also appeared as a legal expert on national and local television. In 2000, Professor Jones was awarded the official official constitutional law advisor for Channel 4. Since then, Professor Jones has appeared on PBS's Frontline, CNN's Burden of Proof, The O'Reilly Factor, Michael Putney's The Week in Review, and Jim DeFettis' Facing South Florida on CBS 4. In 2003, Professor Jones testified as a constitutional expert before the U.S. Congress on restoration of rights to ex-felons, advised governmental agencies as a consultant, including the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Miami-Dade Commission to draft the affirmative action plan for Miami-Dade County. In 2006, he advised the city of Miami on the constitutionality of its regulations on deadly force. In 2015 and 2016, Professor Jones was retained by the General Counsel for Miami-Dade County School Board to advise that office concerning affirmative action policies. Professor Jones is a sought-after speaker at many universities. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, Professor Jones. We're now going to turn the discussion over to our professors for their opening remarks. Professor Blackman.
Sure. It's an honor to be Professor Jones. That is an impressive bio. Sigmund Freud, is that right? Did I get that right? That's kind of cool. I've never been to Vienna, but maybe one day. Viennese waltz, maybe, but we'll get there. So the topic today is cancel culture. And I want to talk about two concepts. Who's in power and who gets to speak? Right? He's nodding, that's good. Invariably, the people who have power don't really need the First Amendment. Why? Because they can speak by virtue of the control that they have. By contrast, I think you'll nod again, those who do not have power generally need the First Amendment precisely because they might otherwise be silenced. So in every culture, I think in history of the world, at least in ours for sure, there have been efforts to try to stop ideas that those in power simply don't agree with. I'll tell you, those efforts are generally not very successful. Because by saying, don't listen to that guy, right, or don't listen to her, what are you drawing? You're drawing attention. And saying, oh, well, maybe that person has something to say, right? Maybe if they're telling me not to listen, like my kids do the opposite of what I say, right? Don't listen to them, maybe I should listen to them. So this is a topic that I've long felt passionate about, but became kind of personal for me. Some years ago, I was speaking at a law school in New York, CUNY Law School, and I was invited to talk about all topics, the importance of free speech on campus. That was my topic. And I walk into a building, just like this one. Yeah, much nicer view. That was in Queens. Not a very nice view. It's a beautiful view. So I walk into the law school, and something that was different though. There were students there to protest me. And again, my topic was the importance of free speech on campus. So let me rewind a bit. The student who invited me was a Federalist chap, just like Jonah, not much different, called me up and said, Professor Blackman, there's some students that are upset you were coming. I'm like, well, why are they upset? Like, well, they Googled some things you said before, and they don't want you in our building. I'm like, what? I was confused. That had never happened before. I'm like, what do you mean they don't want me in their building? Like, well, they listened to some of your podcasts, and they read some of your blog posts, and they don't want you in the building. And they're organizing a protest. I'm like, no way. That's not going to happen, right? There's no way. I'm not that important. I'm not worth protesting. So I show up, and a member of the campus security team shows up and says, can I talk to you? I'm like, all right. And he says, well, I got to talk to you. He says, So there are about 5 dozen students protesting in the hallway outside your classroom. I'm like, oh, okay. And then he asked me, what's your exit strategy? My exit strategy? Iraq, right? What's my exit strategy? There's young, but I'll get to remember that reference. What's my exit strategy? Yeah, how are you leaving the building? I'm like, oh. I'm like, I don't know, take an Uber? All right, good, don't take the subway. Oh, okay, so then it kind of got a little real for me. I'm like, wait a minute. So I don't have a video here, I can't play it for you, but maybe you can watch it later. It's on YouTube. I'm walking to the classroom, and there are maybe 50, 60 people shouting at me, screaming at me, saying every word, calling me a Nazi, calling me a fascist, calling me every word in the book. Saying you're not welcome here, we don't want you here, go away. And then I'm just walking through this, and in candor I say, okay, you know what, I'm here, they have the right to yell at me. I mean that sincerely. They have the right to yell at me, that's their prerogative. It's a public university, CUNY Law School. I'm gonna walk through this torrent and get to the classroom. Okay, so walk through 50, 60 people, I get to the classroom. There's like 4 people in the classroom. So there's 60 people yelling at me outside, and like 4 people in the classroom being, okay, all right, that was much ado about nothing. But then what happened was kind of interesting. The students file in, and they surround the classroom, all 4 corners, surrounding me. So as close as this wall is to me, a person standing right behind me. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is gonna be different. So I'm like, taking out my computer, taking out my notes, getting ready to start speaking. And again, my topic was free speech. And the student, just like Jonah, says, okay, here's Professor Blackman, here's my bio, and they start chanting, no, he is not welcome, or we don't want him here. I'm thinking, okay, what am I gonna do? So I say, all right, it's good to be here, And they say, no, it's not good to be, we don't want you here, you're not welcome here. They're just screaming at me. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna let them get their yells out. I'm gonna sit here, I'm gonna stand quietly and let them yell and scream. Okay, then someone from the administration walks in, an associate dean who I never spoke to before or after. And she goes, you have to let him speak. And if you don't let him speak, I'll be back. And she left the room, she never came back. So I was on my own. I was on my own. I was like, all right, Josh, you gotta figure something out here. So they had actually put around these pamphlets about me, which listed all the crazy things I've said before. Right? They actually did opposition research on me. So I mean, all right, good job, law students, right? You went law school, Westlaw, good job. And I had this little pamphlet, let me read this for you. And I said, one of their hit sheets was, they said, legal objectivity is a myth. Maybe you agree with that, I don't know. But they said, legal objectivity is a myth. And I said, wow, that's a funny thing to say. And one of the students said, I'll quote, it's gonna be a curse. And the student said, fuck the law. And they're shouting at me in the law school, fuck the law. I'm like, oh, that's interesting to say, fuck the law, you're law students, you take the bar in a couple of years. I'm like, all right, that's funny. But I didn't sort of yell back at them. I tried to turn the other cheek and be gracious. Say, you know what, let's talk about legal objectivity. And I started talking about some legal issues. And they got real uncomfortable. Because they were expecting me to be this flamethrower and to hit them back hard. And I kill them with kindness. That's my strategy always, kill them with kindness. And then after a few minutes, I started getting very nervous. Because like, wait a minute, this is not what we expected. We thought we were gonna get this, this right-wing nut job from Fox News and come here and, start screaming at us. And instead I'm talking about the law, I'm talking about Supreme Court cases, talking about things, and they just got really antsy. And then the leader, this one girl, she was like, all right, let's get out of here. And they left. She just walked out. And I found out they actually went to the dean's office to complain that the dean let me on campus. The dean of a public university let me. They were complaining to the dean that I was allowed on campus. But then it got better. The event turned better. So there was one guy in the back, staying in the back, just the same way where you're standing, and we were just going back and forth. And he said something that was interesting. He said, you know what? You're not as bad as I thought you were. I'm paraphrasing. It's like a 20-minute conversation. You're not as bad as I thought you were. I'm like, oh, thank you. He's like, yeah. You know what? He said, talking to you actually changed my mind. Imagine. I'm like, good. And then another student came in and said, I came in towards the end. Why? I was afraid to be seen with you. Because I was afraid my students would basically harass me that I came to your event. He came at the end quietly. That's why there were 4 people there. And he's like, this is not a good climate for free speech. I'm like, wow, that's a serious accusation. And then we went back and forth, and we actually had a decent conversation. I threw my notes out the window. I didn't talk anything in my prepared remarks, but we had a discussion. And then after that, a student emailed me and said, you know what? I thought you were this way, and you actually weren't. You were actually a reasonable person. And I give this anecdote not to single out any student or any school, this could happen anywhere, but this frenzy began at a law school in New York, not dissimilar from this one. Students roughly your age, maybe Florida, New York, a little bit different, not that different. But they freaked out, and they sort of massed together, and their goal was to block me from speaking. They tried to intimidate me. Mm-hmm. They tried to scare me. They tried to shout at me. Now, I would just ask you all, if you were having an event at a classroom, and a police officer said there's 60 people screaming at you, would you have walked through that gauntlet? You don't have to answer. Now, I'm not brave. I have life tenure. Oh, funny story. My tenure vote was 24 hours before this speech by total chance. So I had tenure, that's good. Nothing's wrong with me, right? I have tenure, you can't fire me. Nothing's gonna happen to me. But not everyone has academic tenure. And again, I'm not brave, right? There's nothing special about what I did. A million people have done that worse, through far worse situations. No one hit me, no one punched me, no one, unleashed dogs at me, no one knocked me over. But there still was the effort to exclude me because of my speech. And I took that incident to heart. I've never forgotten that. It happened some years ago, but I still remember it. My mom watched the video, she's like, "You're never ever going inside ever again. You cannot go to any school." I'm like, "Mom, I love you, I'm not listening to you." But it's important, right? I'll bring it to the present. A few weeks ago, a month ago, was a guy named Charlie Kirk. I'm sure you know about him. Maybe you like Charlie Kirk, maybe you don't. Maybe you think he's an awful human being, maybe you think he's a patriot, right? But he would go to college campuses and debate every topic. Go to YouTube, there's thousands of hours of this stuff, just debating every topic. And some guys decided to shoot him. The rifle from a distance. I'm looking out the windows now, right? I'm a sitting duck, right? I got no protection. I hope our discussion today will illustrate how important it is to hear the ideas that you don't agree with. And why, especially because you don't agree with them, the people who are not in control of the situation should be allowed to speak. Now, maybe we'll get into the nuances of this topic or that topic, fine. But, hey, welcome aboard. But I come in peace. I come here with my words. I have no gun, I have no rifle, I have nothing else other than my words and my speech. And hope we can talk about why it's important to allow me here. Thank you, Professor Jones. You have the floor.
I think that this, the issue of cancel culture is a critical topic today. It's critical because we live in a democracy, and I think that cancel culture, as I want to try to explain, is a danger to that democracy. Let's begin by defining some terms. So the Oxford Dictionary defines cancel culture as the action or practice of publicly boycotting, ostracizing, or withdrawing support from a person, institution, thought to be promoting culturally unacceptable ideas. And according to Dershowitz, who is also a cultural commentator of sorts apparently, he says, the notion of cancel culture was first used in a line in a 1991 film called New Jack City. It's a film I know. Where a drug dealer named Nino Brown, played by actor Wesley Snipes, said, "Cancel that B-I-T-C-H. I'll buy another." What is insidious about cancel culture is that it involves concerted action by a group to destroy an individual's reputation. I think that's what drives it. And perhaps the earliest example is the Salem witch trials. We can also argue that Joe McCarthy engaged in cancel culture because whoever he identified as a communist would then find themselves blacklisted. They couldn't get a job. Often they'd be fired from any job they actually had. More recently, I recall vividly an instance when there was a Republican convention. And I'm not going to single out Republicans by any means, but I remember a Republican convention in which Ted Cruz in 2017 led a chant against Hillary Clinton, said, "Lock her up, lock her up, lock her up." I thought that was crazy. In the context of today, cancel culture takes place in social media. Al Franken was canceled by the Democratic Party in a Twitter storm for appearing on an album cover with his hands outstretched toward a woman's breast. This was a gag. He was nonetheless running for Congress. The same social media canceled Will Smith for his infamous slap. Dave Chappelle was canceled when he performed a comedy skit that offended the trans community. Too often, the first casualty of cancel culture is due process of law. Guilt is established by accusation. We no longer even say alleged. The presumption of innocence replaced by presumption of guilt. Nate Parker was canceled for having been accused of rape, despite the fact that he had been acquitted more than 10 years ago. Michael Jackson was canceled and remains supposedly canceled based on allegations he had molested children, even though one of his accusers claimed he was molested at a train station that had yet to have been built at the time he was allegedly molested. But cancel culture is at its worst when political leaders who ought to know better join in. According to ABC, September 22, then President Joe Biden stated, Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundation of our republic. There are three dangers, cancel culture, three main dangers. One is to free speech. Most of us imagine the danger of free speech as the danger of an authoritarian government pulling a speaker like Feiner, for those who read the Feiner case, off his soapbox, or threatening to jail Paul Robert Cohen for wearing a jacket which says F the war in Vietnam. He spelled out the
Fuck, just so I keep a pattern saying fuck again.
but the most pervasive threat to free speech is indeed cancel culture. We think of it as the government doing something, but cancel culture is a more pervasive danger to us now. It's not the government, it's what's happening on the internet, it's what's happening in the media. When Cohen wore his jacket, when Feiner called public officials of his town champagne-sipping bums, the goal, right or wrong, was to communicate ideas. They epitomized the need for free speech as they participated in public debate. Right or wrong, they were doing what people do in democracy. But cancel culture is corrosive to the values of democracy. Cancel culture is a culture of intolerance, which seeks to shout down or silence those who seek to communicate. It is not about freedom, but it's suppression. As the New York Times editorial stated, America has a free speech problems. America losing hold of their fundamental right to speak their minds without being shamed or shunned. As Bill Myers stated, we must get past this endless, unforgiving, zero-tolerance mindset on punishing or disappearing anyone, even caught saying the wrong thing. The right response to speech you don't like is more speech, not the lazy, cowardly response of canceling people. And so canceling culture is kind of not just character assassination, but symbolic erasure of that person to make them disappear from the public space. So this is a danger to free speech. The second danger of cancel culture is that it fosters a toxic atmosphere that not only destroys civility, but it threatens to make America a more dangerous and a more violent place. Martin Buber talked about the need for an I-thou relationship. Cancel culture replaces this with an I-it relationship. Perhaps some would say it's an us versus them relationship. A person accused of making a racist comment becomes a racist. A person accused of making a sexist remark is reduced to a sexist. You are a sexist. A person, Democrat or Republican, with ideas we don't like, we simply call them a fascist, and we erase them. This is very dangerous. Consider what happened when Louis Mangione killed the CEO of a healthcare company. Instead of universal condemnation, Mangione achieved celebrity status. Dirty Harry with his 44 Magnum carrying cop, and for those who don't know, just remember he's the one that says there's nothing wrong with shooting as long as the right people get shot. That was Dirty Harry. Cancel culture makes us all into so many Dirty Harrys, because once we reduce another human being to being a racist, or sexist, or fascist, we have in fact assassinated them. We've assassinated their character. And it's a small step from assassinating someone's character from legitimating or normalizing their physical death from killing. Small step.
That's a good point.
So perhaps the syndrome I'm speaking of has something to do with why after the attempted assassination of President Trump, there was a hashtag, which was not funny, which read, "How did you miss?" Didn't think that was funny. Perhaps it also has something to do with how a sitting U.S. Congresswoman could tweet, after brutal murder of Charlie Kirk. She said, there are a lot of people who are talking about him just want to have a civil debate. She stated, I won't mention her name, she said, these people are full of S-H-I-T. This is after the person is dead. America is becoming a dangerous place. We participate in cancel culture, we become part of why it's becoming a dangerous place. And so it's not a passive act. There's a sense of complicity, I think, for everyone who participated in that. I want to just have a personal anecdote. There was a guy who owned a basketball team, and he had a girlfriend. And he told his girlfriend, who was seeing some black guys in one of the games, don't bring those kinds of people, paraphrase, don't bring those kinds of people to my games. And after he had made that statement, there was a movement online to not only have him banned from the NBA, he couldn't own his team, he couldn't even be a part of the NBA at all. And I remember joining in, and after I joined in, Jay-Z, who was a black person, said, how can you do this to this person? He hasn't had a trial. How can you presume him to be guilty? And at that point, I felt as if I had been part of a mob and trying to get rid of him. I don't think any of us should be part of a mob. The final danger of cancel culture is this. We live in what I think is still the greatest democracy in the world. But democracy requires dialogue to exist. Without dialogue, you do not have a democracy. Think of and I said this in my class, think of democracy as a plane that's flying through the air. Once you penetrate the hull, the plane goes down. You may not like the person who gets up and says something you don't like, but if you shoot him on that plane, then you crash the plane. When, after Charlie Kirk was shot, people joked about his death. Or after someone makes an effort to shoot President Trump, they joke about his death. We create an atmosphere in which dialogue ceases to exist. And, when we legitimate this kind of violence, we risk crashing the plane of democracy because it requires dialogue to exist. Let me leave you with this, and this is Alan Dershowitz from the book Cancel Culture says, cancel culture causes more problems than it solves. It falsely accuses. It applies double standard of selectivity. It fails to balance or calibrate vices or virtues. It has no statute of limitation. It provides no process to challenge cancellations. It is standardless, unaccountable, not transparent, often anonymous. It hides personal, ideological, and political agendas. It can be used for revenge, extortion, and other malign motives. It is un-American to the core. It must be stopped. Let it destroy the soul and values of this nation. And let me just leave this one thing more, and that is, at the root of cancel culture is not an effort to bring about change or to communicate ideas. At the root of cancel culture is hate. And sometimes we think it's okay to hate someone who is someone we think is a sexist, or we think is a fascist. But here's the problem with that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Let me stop.
Yeah, I think those very profound remarks. One thing you said that kind of just struck me, and I hope I paraphrase it correctly, when you characterize a person's personality, their speech, you make it that much easier to assassinate them as a person. And I think the reason why is when you say a person's not even worth speaking, not worth being in your presence, then his life is not worth saving. Then it's just stepping on a cockroach, right? Stepping on an insect. I think that's a very profound thought. The other thing that you made point in your self-reflection that you joined the mob against Donald Sterling, that was the owner of the Clippers, right? And look, I'm guilty of sin. I'm sure I've done it in my life as well. It's not to get really wrapped up in the moment, and you see this person who you think is an unqualified bad, who does something that you think is not just wrong, but maybe downright evil. I've been called evil by before. I did a debate at a law school where someone called me evil. A professor, by the way. You probably knows him, I won't say his name, who said I enable evil. And when you tell students that a professor is evil, then by all means you give them a green light to shout and holler and knock them off the podium. So then I guess what's the constructive lesson that we can sort of take away from this? We try to give students a lesson to take away. When you see something that makes you very angry, and then people are sort of massing upon it, your native instinct is to sort of follow along, to join the crowd. I usually do the opposite. If there's someone that's being attacked, I don't know why, just inside of me, when someone's being attacked, I'm just drawn to sort of defend the person who's under siege. I don't know why. I always had this mentality. Call me Jew the obscure, right? I try to defend the lost causes. And there have been times where my own friends have been under cancel culture. And I was the first one to speak out in their defense. And then when you're the first, that's the hardest one. But the second one is hard, but not quite as hard. The third one's easy, right? So if you're the first one to sort of stick your neck out for someone, you are giving cover to someone else to join behind you. And that's what I always try to do. And trust me, these have been on the left and the right, people that I respect and admire, who were, I'll just give an example. A friend of mine was working in the first Trump administration in the Labor Department. And I've known him for 15 years, brilliant lawyer. He had made a joke about a Jewish friend, and I'm Jewish, and it was obvious he was making a joke, right? It was so obvious it was a benign joke. But if you ripped it out of context, it was a Facebook post, so if you just rip it out of context, it looks like he was saying something anti-Semitic. It wasn't. Some reporter spent, I don't know how many hours scrolling through years of Facebook posts, and he plucked this one quote out of context. And he put this in an article in Bloomberg Law, and it was read widely. And there was pressure to fire him. And I spoke up. I said, no. First I gave the full context of the post. I said, I know him. I've eaten at Jewish restaurants with him. He's a friend of my family. And I was getting attacked for that. And it turned out the reporter was put on leave later because he completely violated all their policies. He did a complete hit job, right? But when I clicked publish in that post, I was like, ooh. Like, I felt it. I knew I was going to get hit real hard. But there was a friend of mine who was getting attacked, who was getting canceled. I'm like, I'm not going to let them do that to him. Not even a month ago, there was a conservative appointee to the Court of Appeals. It was Rebecca Tableson. And President Trump appointed her to the Seventh Circuit. Ironically enough, who opposed her? Conservatives. They said she wasn't conservative enough. And I've known Rebecca for years. I've known her for a long time. I know her family as well. And a bunch of conservative groups put a letter to the Senate saying, don't confirm a Republican, she's not conservative enough, which I thought was completely false. But they crossed the line, I thought. Because they talked about, again, she was Jewish. And they said she gave a fairly small amount of money to the Jewish Federation of Milwaukee. Okay, if you know the Jewish Federation, it's like the most generic charity in the world. They help everyone. And they help some liberal causes. They help some just LGBT work, they do, I'm not gonna deny that. But she gave some money to a Jewish charity. And they said, you know what, this is a radical person. So you know what, I put a post up saying, this is wrong, right? You were going after her. One group actually attacked her rabbi, saying, her rabbi said things like gay rights, that's why we should cancel her from the Senate. And I defended her. And I took hits from my own people, right? From conservatives who were mad, and they said, why are you coming after conservatives? I try to do what's right. So my friend was getting canceled, I defended her. She was confirmed yesterday. Every Republican voted for her. Now, the single Democrat, fine, right? But every Republican voted for her. And you know what? I don't think my post made any difference. But I think I try to, for my own kids at least, try to illustrate through word and deed how you're supposed to behave. And when you see someone getting canceled, or attempted to be canceled, it's so easy to just either jump on the mob, jump on the bus, or just sit back. And sometimes you can piss off those you agree with, and those you disagree with, right? It doesn't matter, because your integrity is what matters. It's what you feel to yourself. And I appreciate Mr. Jones saying, I canceled. By the way, Jay-Z, he almost got canceled recently. Mm-hmm. He was accused of some pretty heinous acts. And I think they were debunked. Am I fair in saying that? I mean, yes. Women make up accusations, it happens, right? His wife, Beyonce, I'm sure was not very happy about that. But due process matters. I'm sure Jay-Z appreciates that intrinsically. I'm done. Back to you. Yeah.
Let me say that I think that one of the things that goes on is that when we created the internet, we created the possibility that you can, it's interesting, there was this character in comic books, I think it was Adam Strange, and he could go through a portal, and he went through that portal, he could be whoever he could be someone he really wanted to be. He could be a superhero. He wasn't that in real life, but when he went through this portal, he was. And he could fly through the air. And so on the internet, you can be who you want to be. You can be a social justice warrior. You can be a defender of the weak, a champion of the helpless, the voice of the voiceless. And that's what people are doing in the guise of cancel culture. They are acting as if they are defending the cause of racial justice. They are defending the cause of equal rights for women. When all they're really doing is calling someone a name, they are demonizing someone, they're normalizing practice on the internet in which you erase someone's character because they said something you don't like. And what many people do is they mistake the name calling, they mistake the erasure for social activism. It's not social activism, it's name calling. It's not social justice, it's destroying someone's reputation and possibly causing them to lose their job. That's all it is. You're glorifying yourself over a form of we call it rhetorical violence, but in a sense, it is simply violence. I think that the other piece to it is that the people who are engaging in this see themselves as pushing up from the bottom. They see themselves as, well, maybe I don't own a printing press, maybe I don't have a title of a congressman or a mayor, but I can have power. I can exert power through my voice, because if I get other people to exert their voice, then we can get someone fired, we can get someone to lose their position. And the problem of this is that at the point at which cancel culture operates only because a huge number of people, a significant number of people have joined in this cry, fire this person, lock them up, and so forth. And it is in a sense majoritarian. It is not something that protects individuals. It's not something that protects minorities. It's something that exists because there's certain groups that have power in society. And if those groups can gather together, then they have the power to destroy someone. And what's frightening about it is that the internet protects them. The First Amendment protects them. But what it does, by protecting them, it destroys our ability to speak freely. So while it's protecting the speakers who are destroying people's reputations, it's destroying our ability to speak. And so it is a frightening situation that we're in. We're caught in, it's almost like there was a film in which there was a guy who would tape someone up to an electrocution device. And the more people who plugged in, the more that person got electrocuted. And so we have protected the people whose right to plug in and punch the button, and we're protecting the right of people to destroy someone. That's what we're protecting. And there's something wrong there. And what's interesting too is that many of the people who are being destroyed are not the billionaires, that's the exception. They're not the powerful people. Powerful people, really powerful people, can protect themselves. The people being destroyed very often are people like John Conyers. I work with John Conyers. John Conyers would call me on his phone. I would need you to come to testify on the Hill tomorrow. And so I remember when he was destroyed. This was a person who spent his life fighting for civil rights. He was gone in a Twitter storm. When it first started, he had allegedly settled a case involving sexual harassment. And no one knows whether the case was true or not, but he settled it. And on that basis, he never had a hearing. We never found out what the facts were. The facts didn't matter. The fact was he had settled the case. Guilt by accusation is enough. So that's what cancel culture is. It's something that destroyed John Conyers. It destroyed, at least he used it to destroy Michael Jackson. It destroys people, very often black people. And many people doing it are racist themselves. I'll stop there for now.
Jonah, here's some questions. I didn't want to cut you off. You actually put together a very list of questions. I think we've deviated from the plan. You want to maybe close your questions?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This one was not on the list, but I think just talking to Emily and listening to your guys' responses, we heard a lot of agreement from you guys. We heard a lot of sharp criticism of cancel culture. Are there any scenarios where cancel culture may be a good thing? Is there a value to having any form of cancel culture? Is there a point at which someone can go so far as to the fact that cancel culture is needed?
That'd be a hard one to think of. I think the short answer to your question, if there is some speech that is so harmful, so odious, the way to counter it is not to remove it, but simply to have the opposite view expressed. I think one of the most powerful messages, imagine a guy shows up to give some terrible speech, walks into a ballroom, there's 3 people there, and 1,000 people shouting outside. That sends a message, right? You know, who says, turn the cameras around, see how big the crowd is. There's no one there. That's the message. Now, the sort of limitations of the Constitution, for example, speech that incites imminent violence, okay, maybe you can ban that. Defamatory speech, okay, maybe we can ban that as well. There might be some speech that's sort of closely related to criminal conduct. That might be banned as well. But there are only fairly narrow bans of speech that might not be protected. But the aspect of due process, you mentioned the Conyers example, I think it's the Al Franken example. There were a lot of people who had their careers destroyed overnight based on mere accusations, and it might feel good to get a scalp, if I can use the phrase, right, to get someone knocked out of office. But you know what happens when that's human data? I always tell my dad, it's a true story. I keep a year's worth of my income basically in cash, not in a suitcase somewhere, but like in a place I can access quickly. Why? Because I might get fired tomorrow. That's my walkaway money. Because I know I'm in a line of work, I can get canceled tomorrow. But that's a terrible investment. It's like, I know that, I got it, I know, right? I got it. But in my line of work, I have to prepare to have that there because I know I can get canceled tomorrow. Nothing stops it. It's come close. I mean, a few things I've said that may have crossed the line, and I sort of apologize for it later. But I felt the mob. There was one time I tweeted something. I can't remember what the hell it was. I don't know what it was. But I had so much hate, I actually turned my phone off. I was like, screw this. And you're gonna say I'm crazy. I still felt the energy coming at me in the universe. Like my phone was off. It's like I could still feel the notifications, and it was intense. And after a day or so, quieted down, and whatever. But if I was not a tenured professor, if my dean had said, "All right, Blackman, you crossed the line. We're going to detenure you," what am I going to do? That's it. I'm done.
Well, I think you mentioned tenure because tenure actually doesn't protect you from, in an absolute sense, from getting fired.
No.
It simply means that you have more protection than the average person. But the bottom, I still remember there was a time in which there was a professor here who was named Waters. He said any of us can be fired with a phone call. I still think that's true.
It is.
But the bottom line is that I think that there are some, there have to be some controls on expression. And so the question is, what should those controls be? And in my view, I think that there should be a way to distinguish between that which is speech and that which I simply cannot call it speech at all. I still remember there was a guy named Shockley. He may still be alive. And Shockley argues that black people are an inferior order of human life. And he argues, he doesn't say it explicitly, he argues more specifically that black people lack intelligence compared to white people. And he used that because there is a taste for racism. And so he would get booked on, let's say you wanted to go on around campus saying you want to spread the good news about truth, about justice. Well, nobody's going to book you. If you say, I believe that black people are inferior and I can prove it, then he was going across the country speaking. And I still remember the day that UM invited him to speak. The University of Miami invited him to speak. I felt weird. I felt afraid to go to my office. I felt afraid to come on campus because it made me wonder, well, if they're inviting him to speak, what do they think about me? So I felt a sense of unease, a sense of uncertainty, a sense of being disempowered. I don't think they should have invited Shockley to speak. I think that it was a travesty that they did. But you see, so I think that there should be controls on speech. I I don't think the Klan should be able to march down the street because they may frighten children. I don't believe the Nazis should be able to march on Miami Beach, where there are a large percentage of people who are Jewish. I think that's wrong. But at the same time, and so I wouldn't have given an injunction to allow them to march, unless it was to march somewhere out in Okeechobee Swamp. But I do think, having said that my proposals are far cry from saying that that if Shockley was shot, or I'll dance on his grave.
Mhm.
And so I think that it's one thing to say that we should control. I mean, unrestrained speech is not, to me, democracy. There should be some restraints, but those restraints should not take the form of me assassinating someone's character. This is the question you should ask. Who has the right to say someone is a racist? Who has the right to say someone is a sexist? Who has the right to say that someone has no right to speak? Now, I think I should have the right to say, if I'm the president of the university, you're the Klan, you're not coming to my campaign. You have to, not while I'm here. But it's another thing to say that you don't have a right to speak. Let them speak on Twitter, let them speak on Facebook. I'm not to read that. But but what cancel culture does, it tries to destroy that person's ability to even appear in the public space. It destroys the ability to earn a living so that they starve. So cancel culture represents another level of it's not communication at all. It's not part of First Amendment theory. It's just part of a kind of cult, which is at odds with and an enemy of democracy, an enemy of dialogue, which is the lifeblood of democracy itself.
So it's interesting the way he phrased it. He says, "Don't speak on campus, speak on Twitter, right? Speak on Facebook." What would happen 50 years ago before social media? Because we did have a First Amendment then. The reason why these groups had to speak is the only way of getting, there was only 4 TV stations, a couple radio stations, a few newspapers. You couldn't. So in one sense, there's such a surplus of stuff in social media that it allows people to access students not in person. But then why would someone like Charlie Kirk still want to go to every campus? Despite everything that happens on your phone, this is different, right? This is a real human being interaction where I'm not an AI chatbot, this is real. And I think there's still value in having that interaction. The classic example.
But you said there's a value in having the Klan speak.
My next sentence. So the classic example is Skokie, right? I anticipated this question. So in Illinois, Skokie, Illinois is a city with a very high Jewish population, and the neo-Nazis wanted to march there. And they could have marched anywhere. They could have marched in the swamp. They could have marched into Lake Michigan for all I care, right? They could have marched anywhere. But they chose to march in a city with a very high Jewish population and a significant number of Holocaust survivors living in that city. Now, why did they do that? To expressly send the message of intimidation to the Jewish people. We are here, we are the Nazis, we are the neo-Nazis, we don't want you to be a Jew, will not replace us, right? All that stuff. I'll get to Charlottesville in a minute. The ACLU was actually divided. This was a very contentious issue. And ultimately the ACLU decided to defend the Klan, and they prevailed. Okay, next one, Charlottesville. So, fun fact, I was at the rally. Wait, my friend was getting married in Charlottesville that weekend of the United Rally in Charlottesville. I didn't know what was going on, so I show up. I'm like, what are those tiki torches? Seriously, my hotel was across the street from the lawn, and I was like, what the hell's going on? And my hotel was across the street from the lawn in Charlottesville. What's going on? I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? It's so bizarre. And I'm not joking, I pull up to my hotel a couple minutes after the tear gas went off, and they'll disperse. And I go into the hotel, I check in the elevator, and there's an obvious skinhead sitting next to me, and we're in the elevator together. Oh. And I'm like, hi. And he wasn't so big and strong then, he was cowering. So, I don't know what the point of that story was, it's just a funny story. But I think the short answer is on a private university like UM, there's no First Amendment right. So the president, this is private, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the president wants to exclude a speaker, I think would have to be done pursuant to some sort of policy that's written. I think even on a private institution, there are certain values of free speech, but a university can be more restrictive. For example, would Hillsdale College, right, or would Ave Maria College be required to host a pro-abortion speaker? I think the answer is probably not. I think universities can have missions, and they can perhaps restrict some types of speech as long as there's actual policy. Now, if there wasn't this was FSU. I think this story would be a little bit different. I think you have had people who are overt white supremacists seek permission to speak on these campuses. The bigger issue is actually security, because the bigger risk is not that the Klan people will hurt the students will mob the Klan people. So actually it goes sort of both ways. But I would tolerate and I would allow it. I would not grant the injunction to block the Klan at FSU or UF. I would never attend their rally. I would probably be speaking at the rally across the street saying these guys are awful. But I think the principle has to be maintained, because it's a short slide from blocking the Klan to blocking Charlie Kirk, and there's some schools that would probably try to block him. Maybe this one place we disagree on.
I think that the disagreements can be creative about that. I think that one of the issues at the core of this is the issue of harm. So, for example, I think that many people say, I will defend to death. I may disagree with what you say about defending your death, your right to say it, and I largely agree with that. I overwhelmingly agree with that. But there is a point of limitation. The problem has to do with the idea that speech does no harm. Delgado uses the analogy. I used to be on a farm. My grandmother owned a farm. We would visit the farm every summer. And what he said, which rang home to me, was when one chicken has a speck of blood on it, the other chickens will peck that chicken to death. That when people are called out, pointed out, stigmatized, and victimized, that puts their safety in danger. I think that one of the problems that I see with hate speech is that it can be very dangerous. When people say, for example, that blacks have no intelligence, and they say that enough, they cease getting jobs, or they run into prejudice in the workforce. And so when people who don't have power are in danger when stereotypes become normalized, they're in danger when hate goes from really being rhetoric to policy. And so I think that these ideas are dangerous in many ways. And I think that the line that I use is between someone who's expressing ideas and someone who is doing something that cannot be, for example, what the Supreme Court has done under Scalia. There's a case where there's a flag, not a flag, but a cross. And someone burns a cross on the lawn of another person. So the Klansman goes to, not the Klansman, but the bigot goes to a person's house and he burns a cross on that person's lawn. The problem with that is that depending on maybe lived in, that person could be in serious danger. And what Scalia says is, well, you really can only ban that if you ban all fighting words. You can't do anything about the racism of the fighting word by itself and vacuum. And the problem with that is it destroys our ability to say, as a society, there's certain kinds of speech that are so opposed to our values as a democracy that we will not allow people to express that in certain ways. And that there's a certain, that the expression of pure hatred against a group of people is not speech at all.
So this was the case of RAV versus City of St. Paul,
Yeah.
if memory serves, right? And this was actually a minor. His name was RAV, we don't know his name, but those were his initials. And he went to the house, he didn't mention the facts with a black family. And in fact, I think he taped two pieces of wood together, he fashioned this thing. I would contrast how Virginia against Black decided some years later, where the court said that if cross-burning is done as a way to threaten someone, you can't threaten someone. Threats are not a protected category of speech. That's different. The problem in RAV, and this was Scalia's opinion, which did not command 9 votes, got 5. Scalia explained that merely engaging in speech with the wrong mindset is not enough. Even having hateful speech is not enough to trigger a violation of the Constitution. I often ask my students, there is no hate speech exception to the Constitution. That's not a thing in our legal system. In foreign countries, it is. In foreign countries, routinely, social media posts are taken down. People are told to go to jail even for engaging in speech that's hateful. I don't like speech that's hateful. I don't engage in it. Again, I worry about giving the government the keys to do that, to give them the license to punish this type of speech. Because I know full well one day I might be into that one, and I might not like it very much. So I might have to defend speech that I disagree with, perhaps selfishly, knowing I might be hit one day with that as well. But I don't trivialize the impact of having a black man's lawn with a burning cross. I don't want to just trivialize. There's a distinct meaning for that. In fact, Justice Thomas voted with the majority of Virginia against black, and Scalia, I think, was in dissent in that case, if memory serves.
Yeah, I think that you see, there are basically two different roads you can travel in terms of having a constitutional framework in any given era. You can have a substantive constitutionalism in which you say as a society that certain values that we hold dear, and Cass Sunstein called these fixed points. And you can also have a society in which we as a society can be neutral. For example, in a society in which you have only procedural concept of speech, someone could write on a let's say on a public advertising, welfare is black theft, and the pastor, oh, that's good. Oh, okay, great. Black people are dumb. Problem. Now, I don't think that is true democracy. I think that in a democracy, we agree on certain values. We agree on equal justice, that people should be equal. We also agree on free speech. I don't think there's a war between free speech and equal justice. If we agree on equal justice that black people, I think one of the values of democracy should be we don't have one group, we don't allow people to say, like in my class, if someone said something like that, they would no longer be in my class. And there's a certain level of respect that I think democracy requires between groups, between people. And it's just that I think that what we have is a discourse in which it posits that there can be a war between First Amendment values and equal justice values. I don't think that war exists in reality. I think Bickle says it this way. He says, to say that we don't allow certain kinds of speech is simply to say we don't believe, we think there's a point beyond which discourse is not being achieved, that communication is not being achieved. We as a society have to have the ability to say, thus far and no farther, we're not going to accept that things that we hold in common and cherish that we're not going to allow you to destroy. And I think that's the thing that's missing from, so that's why Shockley can speak, because we don't have something that's so basic. I saw a film yesterday evening. It was called, I think it's Inherit the Wind. And they make fun of a guy who believes in God. They make great fun of him. They ridicule him. And at the end, Spencer Tracy, who was part of, and this was cancel culture in 1960, what Spencer Tracy does at the end, he criticizes the journalist who was ridiculing the person who believed in God. He says, you're like a ghost with no body, waving, gesticulating your sleeves in the air because there's no substance to you. Laughing at this other person, but what is that makes you you? Where is your substance? What is it that makes you flesh? We have to have a democracy that has some kind of backbone, some kind of muscle that says this, we are going to protect people who are powerless. We're not going to allow them to be disrespected and to commercialize that disrespect. We're not going to allow it. And that requires a substantive democracy and a substantive First Amendment. That's what we don't have. But I think that's what we should have. should be limits. Unrestrained talking is not. If I can yell and scream and call people a FAG, if I can call women a BITCH, if I can, and they've commercialized it, by the way. Something is wrong with that. And so I think that there should be limits, but I don't think those limits should be set by Twitter, by people on Twitter who wants to simply say this person's name, or let's get this person fired from their job. So cancel culture is not a way to help us be more egalitarian. It's just a way of preventing us from becoming the democracy we need to be.
Are we at time?
Not yet, but if it's okay with you guys, I'd like to open the floor for some questions.
Oh, yes,
and
please,
answers,
questions.
So we can get
Yes,
some.
that's a good idea, thank you.
Start with Julia.
I was wondering your guys' opinion. If I was by myself in a room of Klansmen or a room of Nazis, I feel like then my free speech is oppressed and I wouldn't feel okay voicing my opinions against that. What happens to people who are then the minority and the victim, and things like that when people are openly practicing their free speech, such as marching in a group of Nazis or marching in a group of Klansmen?
I think the analysis turns on form. Sorry to make this a boring Kamala answer,
Yeah.
but you're in a room. If the Klan books a venue, they're the designated speaker. They get to speak. I think it's a good rule fix that at any event, the audience gets to talk back, and I think it's very. That's why I interrupted us. Back and forth. If there is an approved speaker, I think you can't speak over them. One person can speak at a time. It's a very basic, simple fact of sound, right? Only one sound can be at the same time. If you feel that your speech is being, violated because they're yelling at you and screaming at you, that's harassment. There might be some claims against that. But one person speaks at a time. I do think as a policy, though, you should be able to ask questions of anyone and ask them pointed questions. You'll see their ideology makes very little sense, and if they're going to defend it, it'll probably be very difficult. They probably will not answer any questions. They'll storm out first, but that's what I would suggest.
As I understand your question, there's a context in which you're saying it, and that is that on many campuses, there is pervasive racism. There's one professor who talks about the difference between what is called the public space and the private space, where many people, when they're sitting down having lunch, when they're walking with their friends, engage in racism. And it makes people who are not members of that group, let's say you're black and you have a group of white people sitting at a lunch counter, and all of them making racist jokes. Or you have a class which you're only black person, or only Southeast Asian person, and everybody's making fun of people from that descent. That would make that person uncomfortable. And so what many people have proposed are campus speech codes. And in the early days when we were naive, people proposed them. Those campus speech codes have almost universally been found unconstitutional. And the problem is that we have an unrestrained category of speech. Everything is speech. You say something racist, that's speech. You say something good about minorities, that's speech too. It's all, they don't distinguish. And I think that the problem is there should be campus speech codes. There should be some way to control and restrain people who have these uncouth ideas, racist ideas, bigot ideas. There should be some means by which we address that. Now, that does not always have to be kick the person out of school, but there has to be a way of addressing it. And I think that it's a tragedy that we don't have campus speech codes that affirmatively embrace people of color, embrace women of color, and all groups, and women. We should not allow unrestrained speech. But I think that at the same time, the goal of all regulations should be to improve the culture. The goal should never be to punish. So how we thread that needle is a challenge. But I think that the core of the point is there's certain kinds of expression which I don't think we should call speech. We have to have the courage to be able to say what that is. Now, how we define it, that is a challenge. And I think the campaign should be to try.
Yeah, Justice Robert Jackson famously said if there's any fixed star in a constitutional constellation, the government can't say what's orthodox, what the truth is. I think the biggest delta between
Isn't that
myself.
West Virginia versus Barnett?
Yes, sir. Yeah, the biggest delta between Professor Jones and me is I don't know what those substantive values are that we all agree upon. In fact, I think there are. I think the purpose of democracy is to let people duke it out. And I'm convinced that when we have those fights, whether in the streets or in the courts or elsewhere, that these races are usually marginalized. I mean, I mentioned Charlottesville, there were only a few hundred people there. If that is the biggest white supremacist gathering in the country, that's pretty pathetic, right? That's the best they can muster, some dudes with tiki torches. It was over in a few minutes. It was actually very quick. So I think in actually allowing these views to be seen, they're marginalized.
The fresh air theory.
What's that?
The fresh air theory.
Yeah, let some fresh air, disinfect it, and they don't have the numbers that everyone else does. So I don't think we have to define the substantive values. I think society works so pure. Now, someone will
It's
present it.
good for Michael John.
What's that?
Michael John.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's almost like an echo.
I try. I mean, someone say, but what about Nazi Germany always goes to Hitler, right? If your society is so corrupt and so debased that you could actually tolerate something like the Nazi state, then the courts are no help for you. At that point, the law is not a help for you, right? Learned Hand said we wear the law on our sleeve, right? The Constitution is in our hearts, and if we get to the point where we're so debased as a society, nothing will help. I believe firmly in this country, warts and all, and I just don't think we need to define those values because I think they'll define themselves.
I think one of the problems that we don't have a level playing field between those who are racist and those who are black. We don't have a system which I know, in other words, the idea is that if you let the discourse, the river of discourse flow, eventually it will flow pure. But it didn't do that in Nazi Germany for some time. At some point, Hitler came to power. And so the problem is that during that period in which the discourse isn't flowing pure, people can come to power and genocide can take place. And so I think if you believe in democracy, you don't want to simply have merely the Michael Johnian faith that discourse will run pure. You have to have some kind of substantive commitment to protecting those who are, and I think campus feast codes would be a start. But you see, it's not a level playing field. And I think that there is the danger that the racists in the short term, I mean, that's Ariel Pachinica. What does he say? He says, eventually, whoever saw truth put to the worst in a free and open encounter. Well, I think the truth ultimately will win. But maybe that will take 100 years. Before that happens, a lot of people can get killed. You can have instances like Charlottesville, where people are murdered. You can have other instances as well. And so I think that before the Charlottesville has happened, we need to do things. I don't think that we should have a laissez-faire approach to the Klan or a laissez-faire approach to the Nazis. I don't think they should march on Miami Beach. And I don't think the Klan should be invited here. Let's say the Klan wanted to book space at UM. I would hope that somehow they would come and find the doors padlocked.
Another question? Yes, right over here.
Yes, actually, I want to kind of bring light to a certain situation that happened February 7th of this year, actually not too long ago. This was in Lincoln Heights, Ohio. So a group of neo-Nazis essentially wanted to march on the town, and they organized sort of a parade of sorts or some sort of rally, I'm not sure what you would call it. And they actually had police protection in that regard. However, organically, the community at large, Lincoln Heights, Ohio is a primarily black minority city. They actually organized a counter and sort of ran them out of town in defiance of the police. How much do you think then that cancel culture is kind of like a response or a reaction towards higher powers, not necessarily serving the needs of the minority community?
Well, I think that's a brilliant question. It is an example of cancel culture. I don't think that you should use violence against people who come to you speaking in that way. I don't think that was right. I do have to laugh if that happened. I wish, but in some ways, the problem is this. In that instance, yes, the people of color, the minorities had the power. But usually the power is on the other side. Usually the people who are the bigots have more guns. They have more weapons. They they probably have the police on their side. So I don't think that violence ever is the answer. That is cancel culture, and that shows that cancel culture can become violence. That, I think, is the danger. That's the darkness. That's trying to fight hate with hate. I think that's right. But I do think, and so that's the problem with cancel culture. Cancel culture attempts to fight hate with hate, darkness with darkness. We need to fight darkness with light. But what we should agree on, though, is that we have to believe in democracy, and we have to think about how we can create a democracy where people do feel safe. How many people would feel safe if you were black and people come to campus talking about how black people don't have the intelligence of whites, and they shouldn't be on campus at all? How many people would feel that way? That you have no right to exist? That to me is I mean, I must say I feel uncomfortable with that. I would never have, if I had the power, I would have tried to help Charlie, regardless of his views. I condemn those who laughed at his views. But at the same time, I don't know what Charlie Kirk said, I don't have this, but I do at the same time believe there is a point at which, in a democracy, you place a limit on what you think about and categorize as speech.
Maybe one more question?
Both of you expressed disapproval of cancel culture. Is there anything you would propose as a matter of policy to combat cancel culture? Because I would also guess that both of you would be supportive of the idea that people can not associate themselves with people that disagree with, right? That's on some level that's canceling them. I mean, if I don't like your views, then and if a lot of people do that, that's essentially canceling. So, is there any things you would advocate for as a matter of policy, or is this really just saying people like, oh, you should allow people to speak and not disassociate with them just because you disagree?
So cancel culture affects in different ways. So you mentioned a few different ways. One is people get jobs fired, and it happens all the time where someone says something crazy on social media and they're relatively not famous or known, right? And they become suddenly famous. The temptation is, if you're an employer, all right, I don't want to deal with this. And I don't know if there's any way to tell an employer, don't fire your employee, they're at will, right? These people are not worth the negative publicity you have for your company. I think the only way to fix it is frankly culture, and this is why this event is such a lovely evening. I'm enjoying myself immensely, Professor Joe. I mean, this is what we should be doing, and I hope it takes 100 years, maybe it'll take 100 years, I don't know, that if all of you one day are sitting there and you're watching social media and something's blowing, it's like, all right, chill. Response like, all right, calm down. Those things actually do help, right? If everyone in this room does his or her little bitty part, it could help the next scandal that erupts on UM campus. But I'm here, he's here, we're sitting here for an hour being good to civil discussion. We don't vote the same way. I don't think we see the same way most common issues, but it doesn't matter. You can work with someone you disagree with. I try to find common ground always, and that's the best we can do. So to answer your question, you do it. Go ahead, go forth and conquer.
If I can say one thing, that is, I think that what I'm against is hate. I think cancel culture is simply a form of hate. I think that that's what the Klan represents. I think that's what the Nazis represent. I don't think hate is an idea. I don't think it's a virtue. I don't think hate should be protected. But I think that our search should be for mechanisms of control. There's no control on the internet at all. You can destroy whoever you want. You can create kind of a verbal flash mob to destroy people at will. They created a flash mob for anyone who says anything negative about Louis Mangione. So he's a hero, and he openly killed someone because he disagreed with what that person stood for. There's something wrong with that. There should be a way to control, some kind of mechanism of control to prevent. I mean, vigilantism takes place on the internet every day. It's kind of like the Wild Wild West. They just decide who they want to destroy. They group up and they go after whoever they want. I still remember there was a guy, he represented, who was it that was accused? Weinstein? I think Weinstein was accused of a crime. And there was a lawyer at Harvard, a professor at Harvard,
Oh,
who
yeah.
worked on
The
Weinstein's
headmaster, yeah,
case.
yeah.
He lost his job
Yeah.
because he was associated with the defense of Weinstein. So the vigilantism is completely out of
Would
control.
you favor a law that any trending topic is automatically censored? In other words, if anyone starts trending, that is, there's one person who has like 0 followers, and all of a sudden is getting tagged a million times, like for like a 24-hour block, I didn't even mention the person. I'm just sort of speculating what you're saying.
Well,
the
let me
mechanism.
say this too. At one point, I'm a Christian. I posted, I think it was a holiday, I posted a prayer on, I tried to post a prayer on Twitter, and I wanted to advertise it, and I wanted to, you can pay $50 and they boost it. You can't boost this. And I said, why? Because it's political. That is literally what was told. So there's certain things they won't let you say. This was a prayer. You can't do that. Now, I still remember at one point, I was opposed to someone, they killed these lions, and the lions weren't harming anyone. And I said, this was such a cruel thing to do. He was a hunter, and he killed these lions.
I remember that guy.
And I still remember someone, when I criticized him, someone said, ha ha ha, yeah, if I find out where you are, I will hunt you. So they don't stop that. They don't stop, but they stop me from posting prayer. There's something wrong with the way that we have laissez-faire for people who want to shout other people down, laissez-faire for people who want to call people names, racist, whatever it is, but there's no, so it seems to me that there should be some mechanism of control, call it an ombudsman, call it a set of rules, or maybe there should be like several different platforms. There's one platform for people who are sane, we'll call it sane internet, and another platform for people who are crazy, we'll call people names. But on the sane internet, you shouldn't be able to call people a name like that. Or if you do, call it the mobbing rule. Once you have more than a couple of days of a person being inundated with threats, someone stops.
Cut it off. All right, over the next law, Professor Jones Act of 2025.
All right, at this time, if either of you would like to make any brief closing remarks.
I got everything on my system, I'm good.
Professor Jones.
So, I mean, I just close with the King quote. What King says is, he says, darkness cannot drive out darkness. How many of you are opposed to sexism? How many of you are opposed to racism? Okay, so this is how you do it. You do it by exchanging ideas. Never in the name of opposing racism. Never in the name of opposing sexism. Call people a racist or sexist or any of those things, no matter who it is. Or no matter who it is, do not express hate toward that person. Now, if you can follow that rule, then you are part of the solution. But whenever, because someone says something you don't like, you call them a scut, you call them a name, you call them a bitch, you call them whatever it is, and you try to destroy their reputation, get them fired, all that, you're now expressing hate. And you're no longer part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And it's not that hate is good, it's just that when you can't use hate to fight hate, you can't use darkness to fight darkness. Only light can drive out darkness, not hate.
All right, well, can we get a round of applause?
Very good, thank you so much.
I want to take this time to remind all of you that we have 2 more great events coming up this semester. The next 2 weeks, actually.
Not nearly as good as this one, though.
Yeah.
Okay, this is excellent, those are great.
We have we're welcoming Professor Kontarovich from George Mason to talk about the situation in Israel right now. A week from today, Tuesday during lunch, that's going to be a great event. And then 2 weeks from today, we're going to be welcoming a bunch of different people who worked on Bush v. Gore. It's the 25th anniversary of that case, and that should be a really fascinating discussion as well.
They weren't born, Bush, you weren't born.
I think
Yeah, they
Zero
weren't born.
Sammy.
Oh my God.
Old. I remember that.
But thank you all for coming. Take any more food if there's some there, and we look forward to seeing you all around campus.
That was good. That was excellent. Sorry to box stuff up.
Can we all get a picture?
Oh, I love that. Yeah.